welcome to the Lens Podcast, where we talk about current events, news, family, church, and life from a biblical worldview. We want to help people think about these things through the lens of the Bible. I'm your producer, David Wiseman, and here are your hosts, Brian and Brian.
Hey, welcome to the Lens Podcast. My name is Brian Hansen. We have a special guest with us today for the first time ever. This is our very first, Brian Solomon, this is our very first guest ever. And it is the president and CEO of 104.9 The River, who allows us to use this beautiful facility. And he's been a good friend for a long time, and hopefully he'll have a couple good insights along the way too, right, Bill?
We are praying to that end, yes.
Okay. Brian Solomon, who are you?
Well, I'm Brian Solomon, but our guest, his name is Bill Montgomery. And so we're glad that Bill Montgomery has joined us on this episode. And thanks for tuning in. As is our practice, every time we gather, we've got 3 segments that we rolled through in our podcast episode. Our first segment is entitled A View of the World, where we take a look at one of the many topics or things that we face, walk in this world, and we kind of talk about it. Then we talk about, in our second segment entitled Your Place in the World, we talk about that topic from a Christian worldview. And then our third topic is What in the World? It's our potpourri, catch-all, our basket of deplorables in terms of the things that we want to talk about. And so that's our 3 topics. Brian, take us into A View of the World.
Well, view of the world is something that's being talked about just about everywhere that you turn, and that is the subject of AI, artificial intelligence. And so today's going to be just a little bit different in that we're just we're going to chat on this segment. We're
Chat GPT?
Yeah. Well, there you go. And this is so new. There's so little known about it. There's a lot of there's a lot of hype in what it can do, and there's a lot of people who are nervous, who are afraid in what it might do as well. And so we don't have necessarily a lot of mandates like this is what we will do, this is how we will handle it, because there's so much unknown about it. But I think Brian and Bill, that there has to be a discussion that's at least started on it, because there's, at least from the Christian worldview, Christian viewpoint and the church viewpoint, there's just silence on it so far because they don't know how to talk about it. So let's just talk about what we do know about it. And this is kind of a scary thing. First of all, let's just say, let's talk about what could be with artificial intelligence. So I was listening to somebody on a program, and they were so excited about the up and coming artificial intelligence because Bill, they can even foresee where you can buy a new car, and they're basically going to eliminate cars being stolen, because the car will be locked. It won't be able to start unless you yourself get in the car, and it will not start unless you somehow, your DNA, whatever, is behind the steering wheel, and then it'll start. That sounds like a good thing, right?
Sold. I'm in.
my son would say sold too after what happened to him just a few weeks ago, I'm sure. But I mean, that's just one of the things. But there's 100. What are some things that we've all heard about?
Well, so I've heard a lot of things, So I think last week there was an article in the New York Times talking about artificial intelligence in terms of its existential threat to humanity, that all of humanity is at risk of being eliminated by artificial intelligence. College students and seminarians and high school students, anybody who has to write a paper these days on any topic, probably knows more about AI than any of us in the room right now. I think your average soccer mom would probably be tuning out at this point. I think your average pastor doesn't really know how to equip his church to think about AI. I think your average political leader is beginning to discover that, oh boy, the government ought to probably have some policy and laws in place to give oversight to artificial intelligence, thinking about the advancement of certain technologies that could think on its own, that could have the capacity to launch particular weapon systems, that could start a world war. That certainly does give cause for pause. So there's all sorts of lanes and directions that we could kind of spend our time here talking about as it relates to artificial intelligence. But I think maybe a good starting point, Brian, is to maybe for our listeners, describe or give a definition of what AI is, artificial intelligence. And I've got one definition that's pulled up here. It says that artificial intelligence, it's the science and engineering of making intelligent machines, especially intelligent computer programs. It's related to the similar task of using computers to understand human intelligence. But AI does not have to confine itself to methods that are biologically observable. So just to kind of give a baseline of what AI is, essentially it's the programming of machines and computers to think independently of humans.
Right. And one of the scary things is right now, from what we hear, is that they are training these computers, these programs to think even in terms of having emotion and being angry about something or being just about something. And so to your point, Brian, this is where the computers are being taught to think in place of humanity, where we've been told, for all this time that there's no computer like the mind. There's nothing that operates as fast as the mind that can compute the God emplaced institutions of the mind, thinking, what is moral, what is right, what is just, what is righteous, all these things. But now mankind, this kind of goes back to Genesis almost, with the Tower of Babel, where they were like, oh, there's God. We think that we can build something to reach him. And now completely different in that we're not building a tower to somehow put our finger up and touch the finger of God, but we're saying, God, creator, we can do better. It seems like that's almost the way that it is. But yeah, building something that is able to think like a human in place of a human and do other things.
Well, it's certainly this field of AI has the potential to transform all sorts of industry, manufacturing, communications, higher education, all sorts of different industrial lanes can be impacted by the trajectory of AI. Bill, I want to bring you in on this. And you haven't been prepared for this. We haven't talked in a pregame or a pre-show. We've just kind of roped you into joining us. But thinking about radio communications, thinking about what you do for a living in terms of media oversight, how do you think AI would impact or could impact or give texture or different texture to the field of industry that you're in?
It's interesting because there's already been a lot of conversation about that. There have been some radio shows that have been guest hosted by AI. They fed the voice.
Really?
AI picked up that voice, and people didn't even know that host was not real. It
so
was
Casey
the computer.
Kasem can come back from the dead.
We feed his voice in, and you could get Casey Kasem back for sure.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and obviously that has some concerns of, are people going to lose their jobs? There's already, been a lot of consolidation in the radio industry. Yeah. And so, this host is on stations all over the country. They're just voice tracking it, programming it into the computer. Well, what if I don't even need that person anymore? And I just say, give me a voice that sounds like this and do a show and get the information from all of these, sources. Yeah. And AI can absolutely do that. It could, write your newsletters for you. It could, it could do your weather forecast. I mean, it could provide a ton of the things that people take an effort to do. And some of that probably is good. Some of that is concerning because it eliminates jobs. But how good will it be on the personality and the connecting part? And that's kind of an unknown because AI is teaching itself some of that.
That's interesting. So thinking about mass global communications, in the previous presidential administration, there was a common phrase that was thrown around: fake news. That was kind of a term that was used on both sides of the political spectrum. Hey, that's fake news, or that's fake news, or this is Russian disinformation, or whatever. And at the root of that, people were beginning to ask the question: what is true? What's real? And so when you think about radio stations and they're communicating a message to their listeners, how could AI maybe muddy the waters in terms of a listener being able to determine what's real or what's true?
Yeah, it's a big concern when you think about radio, television, social media. AI, whenever it has the voice, even the face of somebody, it can create, and we've heard about these before, but now much, much more accurate than it ever was, the deep fakes. Because before you needed all the technology to do that. Now the technology exists at the fingertips of anybody where, they put this quote out here of something Brian Solomon said, and Brian Solomon says, I never said that.
Right.
And they go, well, here it is. It's right here. Here's his voice. Here's his face.
Yeah.
And so did he do that or not? I adjunct a college class, and when I brought up ChatGPT, and some of them knew, some of them didn't, and literally they were pulling it up in class and creating a paper, creating a play, and they were like, oh my goodness. I'm like, you've got to use this for good because, and they have already created, I believe, things that can discern what was AI created and what was not. But at what point does AI get so good that it can't determine how it was created?
Well, and to your point there, so I think I was telling the story a little bit earlier. My daughter just graduated from a school in Boston, and she was telling me about. I actually asked her if she had heard about it, and she's like, "Dad, where have you been?" And so I said, "Well, what can it do?" And so she gave me an example. She was like, "Hey, give me a 150 word example on something that was in her field of dietetics." And I was like, "Okay, that's dietetics, but I'm a theologian." So tell me, so I gave her an example of a theological point of view that I challenged it to write a paper on. And I said, okay, so 125 words on, I forget what the topic was, but you know what? It came back exactly if I had written it, probably better than what I would have written it. And I just couldn't believe that it would have my theological viewpoint based on maybe the question that I gave it was a little bit leading too. But here's that's kind of we've done the 10,000 foot overview on what AI, artificial intelligence, is. But that is going to take us into our second segment, and that is your place in the world. So when we're talking about artificial intelligence and AI, the question is, okay, it's here. By the way, Brian, Bill, David, it's not going away.
No,
it's not like we can say, "Hey, let's put this thing back in the box," and we let it sneak its head out of the box. We don't like it, put it back in. It's here. So now the question is, okay, well, now that it's here, what are we going to do with it, and how does the church respond to it? Which is kind of our lane. How does the church, or how do Christians think about this? Because right now, we hear some people addressing this, but not a whole lot. And the reason we don't hear a whole lot is because we don't know, number one, we don't know a whole lot about it. And what we do know about it, we don't have a lot of thoughts on it because we're limited in what we know about it. So, let's just ask this simple question. How should Christians think about AI?
Let me wade in here, and I'm going to give a very simplistic answer that, Lord willing, may carry a little bit of weight in gravitas. Your question was, how should Christians think about AI? I think Christians should think about AI biblically.
Oh my word! The deep thoughts that come out.
Now, what I mean by that is
go with it.
Is so Genesis 1:26 and 27. God, He's creating all things. He's walking through the days of creation. We're moving towards day 6, and in day 6, the pinnacle of creation, God says, "Let us make man in our image." And let us make him male and female. And in the image of God, he created them male and female. Meaning that humanity is created in the image of God and is distinct from the created order because man bears the image of God. And so there's all sorts of image of God related consequences, implications as it relates to AI as we walk into this field. So how should Christians think about AI? Well, we should begin by thinking about AI through the lens of image of God issues.
Yeah.
So we need to begin to think about the dignity of humanity, the worth and value of humanity. So any use or using or leveraging AI for the purposes of eliminating or harming humanity in any way should be rejected out of hand. Now, typically, folks aren't going to leverage and use AI immediately in ways that will harm or devalue image of God related things. They'll say, wow, look what we're able to do to help humanity. Look what we're able to do to make life easier for humanity. And then all of a sudden, boom, humanity seems to be disregarded for the pragmatic getting tasks done. Look, I'm just getting stuff done. We're cranking. Look, we're able to make more automobiles. We're able to make more chips. We're able to make more this, that, or the other. Humanity is now relegated to the sidelines in terms of work. We know that there's dignity attached to work. Well, now there's an image of God issue in play there. So Christians should think biblically, and Genesis really ought to be the first place that we go. Now, there's a whole lot more to be said about this, but our ethics as it relates to AI need to be shaped by a Judeo-Christian ethic.
Okay, so let me stop you there, and let's say this, and this is going to lead to a question. AI, artificial intelligence, is not ethically neutral.
That's right.
Okay. Now, let's make that statement and let's ask question number 2.
Yeah.
Should Christians be involved in the creation of AI? Or Christians have been really good about saying, oh, no, that's evil, that's coming, stay away from it. But if this is coming and there is no chance in the world that artificial intelligence is ethically neutral, then how should Christians run toward it or lean into it? Or should Christians say, yeah, no, that's evil, we're going to stay away from it? And so I think to your first point on the first question was going back to Genesis chapter 1, verse 27. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. He created him. Male and female, he created them. And so anything now that is created comes from man, right? And it can be created with a viewpoint toward evil. It can be created with a viewpoint toward that which is good. And if this is coming, could we make the argument that the church or that Christians should lean in towards this to have an influence in what is coming out in this artificial intelligence?
I think it's important to remember that AI gets its information from what we feed it. That's and right. What it finds.
Yes.
And so if I want it to have the ability to grab a biblical worldview, I better be involved in the ability to feed it the information that gives it a biblical worldview. Kind of like you found the theology in there. Yeah. If it is devoid of that, and it is also kind of teaching itself ethics and morals and things, we've got to be involved in that process.
Absolutely. I totally agree. To give it what God has given us, and that is the ability to think morally, to think rightly, to think about things that are, truthfully, things that are good, just, above reproach. So these are things in context as to what do we do with this? Do we run from it? Do we bury our heads in the sand like an ostrich, just hoping that the best happens, or do we lean in toward it and say, hey, if this is coming, let's make sure that we're directing this in the right direction?
Well, Brian, I think we're obviously involved in pointing political leaders toward Christ. We have extended the Great Commission into the political realm. We want to see lost people in the political realm embrace Jesus as Savior and follow Him. That's a realm that we want Christians to be in. Well, why wouldn't we also want Christians to be in the realm of science and the technologies and the humanities and in higher education and in blue collar agricultural fields? The question here is, how should Christians think about AI? Maybe we ought to begin thinking about sub questions like, how could AI help reimagine missions, global missions? How could AI advance the football down the field in terms of Bible translation work?
I had that conversation at a conference I was at last week, and it can't do translation work on information it doesn't have. But when you've got information that you can feed it, it is going to work infinitely faster.
Yeah. So you think about all of the things that, so my grandparents personally supported missionaries along the Amazon all through the 50s and 60s. And they literally went down the Amazon on a boat and were interacting with unreached peoples who spoke different languages. And so there was a learning of language, and then there was a moving that language into the Bible and teaching the Bible through that language. I think about how AI could have helped advance their work or sped up their work. God in His sovereignty didn't allow that, and that's okay. But how could AI help reimagine some missions work like that? How could AI reimagine the church's mission of making disciples of Jesus Christ? Also, how can we help Christian business leaders get out in front of some of the ethical things related to corporate greed and copyright issues? Those things don't go away. And then, Brian, as you and I are rubbing shoulders with political leaders, helping them understand that the truth of God's word doesn't go away when we're talking about issues of AI. They don't go away. Those ethics remain. So to your point, Bill, those ethics need to be held by the developer who is shaping the course of these AI algorithms and the outcomes that they produce. So those were some of the questions that I had that are kind of sub questions that we don't maybe necessarily have all of the particular answers to, aside from, hey, Christians, don't stop thinking biblically about the issues of AI.
And just let me say this as a closer on this. There's a lot of people that are tremendously afraid that AI is going to be the end of humanity. And there's some talk about that.
It's an existential threat.
Yeah. And I just have to, I just want to say this, and I say it with a little bit of jest, but with all sincerity. Who do you think you are that can wipe out what God has created? Get over yourself.
That's right.
Did I say that?
You did.
That was AI.
Well, that was AI. Well, anyway, hey, this has been a great topic of discussion. We might come back and visit this in the future as more stuff comes out on it. But what it is going to do is lead us into our last segment, and that is what in the world? So, Bill, we're going to put you on the spot here, and just after I talk a little bit. So, in our last segment, all we do is Brian and I we talk about what's been going on in our lives, or what what is of special importance to us. So, months ago, maybe a month ago, my wife and I, we bought tickets for our kids to go see our favorite comedian, Nate Bargatze. And then the night before, we weren't going to go. Mandy and I weren't going to go. We're doing it for a special thing for them. And they said, "Hey, Dad, what do you have going on tomorrow?" And I said, "Hey, nothing really." And they're like, "Well, you do now." So we all went together.
Awesome.
Yes.
And man, he's clean. He's funny. It was just his dad was there with this magic act in which he did absolutely no magic, and it was a riot. And we just had a good family time and an enjoyable time. I don't recommend a lot of entertainment, but I recommend this guy. He's clean. He's funny,
awesome.
And he has a spiritual background. And we had a really enjoyable time. Bill, tell us something that's of special interest to Bill Montgomery. What's going on?
I just got back from a conference last week. I was in Orlando all week for the Christian Music Broadcasters Conference. That's what we do here at 104.9 The River. And it was just great to see and talk to so many Christian artists. And I think both from a quality standpoint, but from a spiritual standpoint, the future is very bright. And that was just exciting to me because most of the times we don't get to meet these people and talk to them. You just see them up on a stage. And so I think there's a lot of people really thinking biblically and, trying to put out music that helps the culture, that encourages people, but also glorifies God. And that was exciting.
That's good. Okay, Brian.
Hey, so what in the world? In my world, hey, the Denver Nuggets. Hey, so when I was, I think I was 8 years old, my dad took me to a Denver Nuggets basketball game. I grew up in Denver, so I'm a big Denver sports guy. The Broncos, the Rockies, the Avalanche, the Nuggets. So the Rockies have been to a World Series. They haven't won, but they've been there. The Broncos have a couple Super Bowl trophies. The Avalanche have some Stanley Cup titles. The Colorado Buffaloes even have national championship trophies and a Heisman Trophy winner too. But the lowly Nuggets, who have been in the NBA for 50 years, were an ABA team way back in the day, have never been to an NBA Finals ever. And so when I was 8 years old, my dad took me to a Denver Nuggets game at the old McNichols Arena in downtown Denver. And I fell asleep in the fourth quarter. It was the Nuggets versus the Pistons. Isaiah Thomas and some of those guys were playing, of course. And for the Nuggets, we had Alex English and Dan Issel and Fat Lever and some of those guys. And I woke up as the game was ending, triple overtime. Was coming to a close, and the Nuggets lost 184-186 to the Pistons, which became the highest scoring game in NBA history, even to today.
Wow.
And so I've been a Nuggets fan my whole life, and the Nuggets are in the finals, and they lost last night to the Heat. I couldn't believe it. So the series is tied up 1-1, but it's been a great journey for all Nuggets fans everywhere. So if you're a fan of the Lens, root for the Nuggets.
I've got a quick, just from my conference that ties in a little bit, probably a little more with Brian and I, but one of the speakers was Tim Sinclair, and a young Christian voice. Literally, he is the voice of the Chicago Fire, the Chicago Bears, and the Chicago Bulls, the PA arena voice. Man. And he spoke. He was fabulous. I got a chance to hang out with him and get my picture. A great dude.
Wow.
That's awesome.
I like it. Well, hey, everybody. This has been The Lens talking about AI. Thanks for joining us on this episode of The Lens. We hope to see you next time.